Hello and welcome to this comparison video of my Apple Extended keyboards and my Apple Extended Keyboard 2. I have full video reviews of both of them. I'll put the links to them in the video description below, but in them I try to not go into too much detail comparing the two because I figured that would be better for a separate video, and that's what this one is. To avoid confusion during this video, it's best to remember that the most yellowed keyboard, so that one, is the AEK1, whereas the one that still looks kind of white is the AEK2. Let's start with what people will be looking at first anyway, the Apple logo. On the Apple Extended 1, it is on the bottom left, and on the AEK2, it's on the top left. The second way to identify the keyboard easily is by looking at the power button. For the AEK1, it looks just like a normal button, and the arrow is very small, whereas on the AEK2, they made it a flat button and the arrow is much bigger. I presume they made the shape much different because they wanted to avoid confusion with typists accidentally pressing this, whereas of course if it feels flat, you can easily tell without looking that it's not the normal buttons. The case design is also quite different between the two. Specifically, there's much more grooves running along the first Apple Extended keyboard. So these grooves here, for instance, they're not on the AEK2, and neither is the groove that runs along the keyboard, which is both at the front, sides, and back. And the Apple Extended 2 doesn't have that. That's just normal. It doesn't have any of those grooves. Also, and even though it's not particularly obvious from the top, the design of the case is quite different. So the AEK1 on the bottom here has a very curved look, whereas the AEK2 has a flatter and more of a wave look instead. It's not that easy to identify which of the two keyboards you have based on just that shape alone when viewed from the top, but when you look at it from the side, it's quite obvious. They both use the same ports, ADB ports, which is a proprietary connection, but as you can see, the connectors are actually flipped compared to each other, so they face opposite directions in either keyboard, and the logo of ADB, which is that thing, is in different positions as well. On the AEK2 it's next to the port here, and on the AEK1 it's on the other side. It's on the back side rather than the side of the keyboard. The back of the keyboard reveals a few other differences. First of all, you can see that the AEK1 is marginally larger than the AEK2. And also quite important, the AEK1 doesn't have any feet at all, whereas the AEK2 does have it. It's got this one foot that runs along the entire length of the keyboard, which is adjusted with this slider. It's a very weird system. I've never seen that on anything else. It doesn't even work very well, to be honest. But the AEK1 doesn't have that at all. But because of the curvature, the keys do sit at more of an inclination by default than they do on the AEK2. The model stickers are quite different. This one is tiny on the AEK1, and the AEK2 has a much bigger one and includes barcode. The slip pads are a little bit different. 4 small black ones on the AEK1 and 1 giant one on the AEK2, I guess to a little bit mirror this giant foot that runs across it. It's got a couple of drill holes on the AEK1, doesn't have that on the AEK2. In fact, it's a bit weird to take this keyboard apart, but anyway. They both use Alps switches, but not necessarily the same ones. The AEK1 only ever came with tactile switches, specifically Salmon and Orange Alps switches, whereas the AEK2 mostly came with dampened tactile switches, usually Ivory or white dampened switches, and sometimes Salmon switches like in the AEK1. I've been told that Orange Alps are a little bit smoother than Salmon Alps, and that white dampened switches are not as well dampened as Ivory dampened switches. As it happens, both of these keyboards have the most common type of switch to the keyboard in it. So this one has Salmon Alps switches and this one has dampened Ivory switches. The impact of the keys is not as hard as it is on this because obviously it's dampened and it's more silent. And the switches in this one, the Salmon ones, are a little bit stiffer. The Salmon Alps feel a little bit stiffer, but they're pretty smooth anyway. They have a quite different feel. I'd say refer to the specific reviews for a little bit more info on that. But they both feel pretty nice, to be honest. I'll give just a little bit of a sound comparison right now. So this is the AEK one with salmon switches. And this is the AEK2 with dampened ivory switches. Both nice sounds, to be honest. They both feel cool as well. So, in my opinion, both are pretty good holes. It's just a little bit what you want in a switch. The Salmon Alps are not exactly silent, even though they're tactile, so not clicky. These are much more silent, though. I'd say probably colleagues wouldn't mind if you use this in an open office, whereas that one might be a little bit on the loud side for them. In theory, they should have the same keycaps, both dye sublimed ink printed on PBT keycaps, but they look a little bit different to me. So if you look at the legends on the AEK2 here, they're fairly thin and pretty sharp, if the camera focuses enough to show you that. Whereas if you compare them to the AEK2, they appear to be a little bit darker and a little bit more blurry. And even a little bit thicker. Now, this might be due to the age of the keyboards. The AEK1 is a little bit older, obviously, but I don't think dye sublimed ink blurs quite that quickly, frankly. I don't know how well the capture cameras the detail here, but to me, if you look for just a moment, it's a bit more obvious, so I'll move it backwards and forwards again. Another small difference is these legends on the case here, beneath the first four function keys, presumably for use with whatever operating system these keyboards came with. But the same is not there at the AEK2. This case has no writing on it other than under the lock lights, which both keyboards have. To be honest, both keyboards are pretty well built, but the cases sound quite different. If you tap on the casing, the AEK1 casing sounds a lot more high-pitched than that of the AEK2. Here, I'll show you that quickly. So, rubbing your fingers along the keycaps gives a quite different sound too. I'm not sure whether that's related to the dampening, but it could very well be. So, this is what the AEK1 sounds like, and this the AEK2. So, quite a difference. Other than those small differences, some of which are really minor, it's pretty much the same keyboard. They weigh roughly the same. I'd say they're comparably sturdy. The layout is identical. The legends are identical, including the weird triple delete thing that I talked about earlier. Delete, delete, and delete. Somebody enlightened me. Apparently, these two deletes are the same, but nobody could really explain why there had to be two symbols for the same function, or why both deletes had to be called the same even though they work in opposite directions. They're both really good keyboards. I wish I could use them, but the adapter necessary for these is very expensive, and I don't have a cable for either of them, so it'll be quite an expensive affair to try and test these in the field. Anyway, that's it for this review. I'll give you a short, quick typing demonstration of both of these keyboards in action.